What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Hail to the District podcast. Once again, I'm Rajan, he's Patrick, and we've gathered here today in celebration for what very well might be one of the four most important days in DC sports history over the past handful of years, right behind the Caps winning the Stanley Cup, the Mystics winning the WNBA championship, and the Nationals winning the World Series. Because today, as any Redskins fan is undoubtedly aware, as of 7:02 a.m. Eastern Time this morning, being Monday morning, the Washington Redskins released a statement stating 21 words that fans of this team have been clamoring for what seems like an eternity. And I quote, "Bruce Allen has been relieved of his duties as president of the Washington Redskins and is no longer with the organization." And Allen's firing has been part of what Pat and I have been jokingly referred to as the Great Purge, with the team dismissing the much maligned head trainer Larry Hess in addition to Allen, while simultaneously being hours away, at least as of the time of this podcast, from officially making Ron Rivera, the former head coach of the Carolina Panthers, the next head coach of the Redskins. So with all of that stated, Patrick, as you've sifted through the events of the last 36 hours or so, where's your head at? How's your feeling? How are you feeling? All of the above.
I'm feeling about as awesome as you can. I'm wearing all my Skins gear as we speak. I almost brought out the jerseys.
We can wear burgundy and gold in public without hating ourselves.
God, it's the best day ever. I landed last night at about 11 o'clock back in Seattle for the first time in 2 weeks. I have a vicious cold. All I want to do is sleep in my own bed. It's the end of the quarter, end of the year for sales, and I woke up to just I forget the number. It was like 114 text messages, and I was like, something happened.
Something went down.
And so the first one I clicked on was from my brother, and it just said, you should probably check Twitter. And obviously, Bruce Allen being done is the best Christmas gift I could have gotten. We've been talking about this for years now. It's a huge day. I don't care. I don't even care if our next year's team goes 2-14. I'm just pumped this guy's gone. Hopefully, it changes some things. It had to happen, and God, it feels so good.
Yeah,
and you're right. I feel I can wear my hat in public.
I've made this joke
pride.
So many times. I continue to say again, I'm not a Star Wars fan by any stretch of the imagination, but I always just
this one's pretty good.
I always come back to that moment. I think it's the episode 6 or whatever, the third of the original 3, where like after Darth Vader dies and they throw the Emperor, who's not actually dead, whatever, according to the new movies. But anyway, they throw him down that hole.
I can tell you all about it if you want.
No, I'd rather not. They throw him down that hole, and like the entire universe is celebrating, and like the last 15 minutes of the movie is just planet after planet of celebrations. And like I feel like that's Redskins fandom today, right? Like the Emperor is dead, this tyrant is dead, and we have Snyder has once again done it. He has sold us the quintessential human emotion of hope. There is something to be hopeful about. There is some silver lining in all of this. There is finally the light at the end of all of this darkness. He's once again reeled us back in. God damn him for that. But at least you can tangibly say something that we are no longer, at least in this capacity, going to be the laughingstock, rotten vegetable of the league as we have been for the past X number of years, and especially for all of 2019.
Yeah, to give you another movie metaphor, I was joking with a couple of my buddies today that I feel like George Bailey towards the end of It's a Wonderful Life, that I was sitting on the bridge going, "Please let me live again. Please let me live again." And I saw the tweet and I was like, "Bert, you know me?" He did sell us hope. Similar to you, Redskins is just, it's so built into the DNA of any really good DC sports fan. And we've talked about, well, is it a Nats town? Is it a Caps fan? It's a Redskins town, whether people want to admit it or not. It always will be.
I've been saying it all along.
And, today it was interesting to follow. Like, Twitter was like crack cocaine today. I couldn't stop looking at it. I was like, God, something else is going to happen.
You're going to get carpal tunnel from all the refreshes.
I know, but I loved it. And, I think we should talk about Larry Hess tonight too, because I think that's equally as important.
Oh yeah.
But there was a point in time where I thought Bruce would never go anywhere unless he retired, and I think there's something to be said for the fans. This is the second time the fans have been like, "Yo, Dan, you need to do something." The other one was when he was about to hire Jim Fossil. He listens to us, even though sometimes it takes him longer than he wants. But he's a fan at heart. He's always said that. And the Fire Bruce Allen movement, praise Jesus, finally came through.
Yeah, jumping to that point, Al Galdi, he said it very eloquently on Twitter today of the Fire Bruce Allen movement, or the hashtag Fire Bruce Allen movement. It was a year plus relentless onslaught that was unprecedented in DC sports. It became impossible for the Redskins to ignore, and the desired result is now realized. But I think the more interesting thing one was Darren Haynes of WUSA 9 tweeting out, Fire Bruce Allen has been used on social media 55,623 times in the last 365 days. 18,000 came just this past month. 18,000 times Fire Bruce Allen or hashtag Fire Bruce Allen was mentioned in the last 1 month. That's staggering. And to your point, it happened. I mean, I think to a lesser extent with Vinny Serrato because everyone was just so fed up with the team and social media was in its infancy. But the outrage towards Jim Fossil is 100% correct when they were about to name him the head coach, and then they went ultimately with Zorny for Horny, or Horny for Zorny rather. And today it's just incredible, and it just culminates all of this. Like, Redskins fans can disagree on so many things, and Lord knows we do, but like this was just one harmonious voice that finally said, on top of the fact that the team wasn't getting any ratings and people weren't going to the games, and the tickets, the jokes about the tickets were what they were, and you could see the large swaths of empty seats. Like finally all of that crescendo to the point where like something had to be done, which is exactly what we've been saying, that like the best way you can make a change on this team for the better is to openly antagonize this team.
Yeah, I think that stat about how many times that hashtag's been used is right up my alley because we work with my company works with the Redskins. I've been in Ashburn. I've been there. They all work, walk on eggshells. I've even jokingly said on Twitter it'd be exhausting to work for the Redskins social team, just because everyone they could do anything good, and that Bruce Allen hashtag was coming. One of the side notes that I think is you mentioned in the opening line the statement that Dan put out, the first statement Dan's released about Redskins in 5 years. There was zero mention of a thank you to Bruce Allen, which I thought was nice little touch. There's also a mention of culture, which I thought was a nice little touch.
Yes.
And obviously at the end he said to bring a winning franchise back to Washington D.C. He checked so many boxes off to me in this 200 words. Was that it?
Something like that.
However short of a little blurb it was, but he killed it. It was so petty and short and to the point, but I was just like, you know what? You and I right now, we're on the same page.
Yeah, finally, it's the first time we're like right on, Dan, like right on. You got it right, totally. It was so vindictive and petty, but to the right audience, so we're like right on. I'm glad you stuck it to him that way.
Yeah, and it's there's so many little tidbits. There's too many tidbits, I think, of this. It's been boiling for so long. It's gotten down to oh, Dan's not standing next to Bruce right now. He's getting fired tomorrow. There's so much that goes into this. But I also kind of wonder, and I don't think this is part of the outline we discussed beforehand, but I also wonder what happens if Alex doesn't break his leg last year, because Smith is in that box now every game, and he's got to be one of the people being like, dude, this organization sucks. You need to go talk to people outside the organization because Bruce cannot be here. And what does Dan do? I'm not saying that happened, but I bet you Alex said something. I mean, so I'm curious
with sports, the confluence of events that leads you to where you are. It is what it is. There's the amount of what ifs that happens in sports history that lead to events later on and change the trajectory of sports history is just incredible. And it's just one of those sequences or fluke sequences that happen. And I mean, Alex Smith breaking his leg and leading to his wife becoming best friends with Tanya Snyder, and totally. It's like, I mean, you can't make that up. And it is. And I 100% agree with your point that's got to have brokered the relationship between the two to where Alex can say this asshat's got to go, right? Like, this guy's a piece. Everyone knows he's a piece, and you're the laughingstock of the league because of this piece.
Yeah, no, I think Alex, I mean, obviously we were completely speculating, but I think Alex was a big influence of telling Dan, you need more people in your ear than just one person. Because I think it was JP reported it, JP Finley and then multiple people came out and reported around it. But I think JP had it first. This idea that Dan just shut everybody off and started talking to outside sources who we don't know. People guess it's Gibbs and Meyer. There's a couple of them, but the idea I've been talking about Bruce being fired for a while. You've been talking about Bruce being fired for a while. This has been, apparently it almost happened last year. So this has been boiling, but I don't think he was ever going to go unless Dan started talking to people outside. And I think to your point around Tanya and Alex's wife becoming friends, Alex starting to be there. Alex has been in really good organizations and played for teams that have won. He knows what it takes. And he's also been beaten down and come right back up. Like, this guy's a football lifer. And I have to believe that my guess is Urban Meyer was in that box because Alex Smith brought him. He did not come for Terry. He was there to talk to Dan for 6 hours or however long they spoke about what to do. Because they're also supposedly friends. I don't know who reported that, but I was like, that sounds sketchy to me. But you're right. I think that single moment's really big to me because I think it's separated. It gave Dan a new person to talk to about football who actually knew what football is about, not some business guy who's a politician who's an asshat and all of us hate him.
So you and I had the conversation offline about, you nailed it, but you felt like the Rivera reports were more accurate. And I was pretty staunch in my belief that I thought it was going to be Meyer as the next head coach. And I believe that report that came out from that guy, I don't know, former 980 or one of
the 980 guy?
Yeah, like whatever he was. And he was emphatically.
He was right for a lot of it, though.
But regardless of that went down, the reason why I felt rather strong in my conviction that it was going to be Meyer is because it reminded me a lot of the end of 2009. There was the Washington Post did an amazing story of how basically Snyder and Allen, when Allen was newly hired, went and spent a few days down at Mike Shanahan's palace.
The Crown Royal.
It lives in
Bahamas
Denver.
Trip.
And basically the idea of that trip was like, hey, tell me what goes into a good organization or what goes into a good head coach or whatever. And by the end of that trip, it just ended up being like, Snyder ended up being like, hey, Shanahan, you want the job? Like, it didn't go down at least to the best of my knowledge or recollection, Snyder didn't go down for that trip with the intention of hiring Shanahan. It was more of a fact-finding mission for a 2-time Super Bowl winner, which led to that. And I kind of thought in my head that this exact same thing was going to happen to Meyer, especially with the fact that he wanted to steal Meyer away from Jerry Jones because of the comment Meyer made that the Cowboys are the Cowboys and the gold standard, or that'd be the one team that he would pick up the phone for to take the head coaching job. And I thought with Meyer, Snyder's ego, he would want to be the one to be like, yo, I hired Meyer away from the Cowboys and I lured him there. Combined with the fact that Dwayne Haskins, the quarterback, McLaurin's there, they'd have the second pick in the draft available to draft another Ohio State guy whom Meyer recruited. So I thought all of the confluence events kind of came that way. Obviously I was wrong. I'm fine with that. That's great. I'm not a Urban Meyer fan personally. So because mostly I grew up rooting for Michigan. So, that's fine. But, that's kind of how I felt about the whole situation.
That's a different conversation.
Entirely different conversation. Didn't go to Michigan, but I just grew up rooting for Michigan for reasons I can't fully explain. I think back to your point about the pettiness, it was very Mean Girls-ish. That video, it was one of the NBC Sports guys. I don't think it was Finley. I think it was somebody else. I think it was I can't remember who it was. I don't want to give false credit to someone, but basically it was at the end of the game, Bruce Allen was walking one way and Snyder and Alex Smith were walking in another direction. And it seems so 7th grade Mean Girls petty, but it just kind of goes to serve the backdrop over it. And then on top of that, coupled with the idea that Julie Donaldson's tweet this morning about how Bruce Allen was, she's been excellent. Also, back to your point from earlier, JP Finley, he's not getting enough credit for all the reporting he's done throughout the course of this. He's absolutely killed it. He's done a tremendous job. Him and John Keim as usual. I mean, the two of them have been all over it. So much respect to them. They've been amazing. But the Julie Donaldson tweet about how Bruce Allen was ushered out of the building by security. I just love it. Literally, I would have paid good money to be out in the parking lot when Allen was there so I could throw rotten tomatoes or moldy fruit at him as he's being ushered out of the building. I would have paid really, really good money for just one shot to nail him right in the face. But
it would have been the biggest tailgate the Redskins have seen in years.
Probably.
The pitchforks would have been out. Yeah, Julie Dawson she's been uniquely all over it to the point where she has a connection somewhere that's feeding her probably direct information. I wouldn't be surprised if Dan's giving her the information.
Dan or the agent of Ron Rivera. That's my feeling on this.
Yeah, I didn't actually know that fact about Shanahan. I thought Dan always wanted Shanahan.
I believe, again, I could be wrong. I could be misciting this, but I know that they stayed a few days down at his ranch or whatever he lives on. And I feel like at the end of the trip is where he basically went to Shanahan. It's like, yo, you want the job? But that was not the intention to go there. The intention to go there was fact finding.
Yeah. No, I mean, I knew they would win. And I remember a lot of discussion about how much Crown Royal was drank at the wherever they were, the Bahamas or a ranch or wherever. But one thing I think that's interesting is, and again, this is a little speculative, but so it came out, I think, on Friday that Bruce Allen was going to be relieved and fired as football ops, but no one knew if that meant, like, is he done with the organization or if he was going to be put somewhere else. And I think that was a strategic move from Dan. There's been a lot of talk. I think some of the quotes that you sent me were from, I think his name is Charles Robinson, about how GM candidates, et cetera. A lot of people are pushing back on Dan even being there, right? But I think the reason it didn't come out right away that he was fired totally is I think Dan wanted to see how the fan base would react strictly to him being moved or as a consultant for the stadium, which, by the way, the stadium situation is worse than the on-field performance.
Yes, it is.
He had 3 places that were states, well, I guess 2 states in the district, in the district that wanted the stadium, and now nobody wants it. I mean, that Richmond debacle is just like Virginia's running for the hills. Maryland doesn't want it. DC can't get the land. I mean, he screwed this whole thing up. But I think it was announced that way because I'm convinced Dan's got multiple burner accounts on Twitter, and he wanted to see what people were going to say about it. And then I think the Fire Bruce Allen hashtag just got, spiked even more, and people were like, screw that. Let's get him out of here. So he has league people being like, I'm not going to come interview there if Bruce is there. You have coaches who are saying, I'm not going to come, be Bruce Allen's puppet. And you have a fan base that says, I don't care if this guy's the janitor. Get him the fuck out of Ashburn. And, I think as early as Friday morning, I think Bruce was coming back. And finally, there was enough blowback from everyone from every angle that Dan was like, you have to go. I'm convinced.
I agree with you. I think when the news first came out, I think it was JP again who tweeted out that, like, as of Monday morning, like, expect Bruce Allen to be removed from football operations. And in fact, on our ongoing Slack thread with me and my friends, my buddy Amit, who ironically is a Cowboys fan, but he was joking. He's like, yeah, that just means Bruce Allen's going to be reassigned as head buttlicker of Dan Snyder. And, like, that's pretty much what we expected. Like, it was actually, it could be head of stadium operations, but really was chief salad tosser. Like, that's what we expected him. And I think I agree with you, what you're saying in half. I think he was looking around and saying if there would be a viable coaching candidate, starting with Ron Rivera, who would be okay with Bruce Allen being in another part of the org. And I think every single viable head coaching candidate was like, no, I want nothing. I don't want this guy involved in anything. Like I said, whether it's salad tossing or janitorial duties or whatever, like, he can't be employed by this organization. It's either him or us. And I think that forced Snyder's hand, because I think somebody, I think it was Julie Donaldson, but basically it was like, I don't even think Ron Rivera was going to accept the faux interview. And I think it was Mike Silver or Ian Rappaport who called it a coronation, basically, that if he came, it was going to be as the head coach or to accept the job offer. And, like, the agent for Ron Rivera is like, I'm not even going to let it go that far if Brucifer is still part of this org.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with this. I think enough people, at least I'm thinking like national media. Last time we spoke, we talked the difference between how it's reported locally versus how it's reported nationally. I don't know if it's the last time we spoke or 2 times ago, but there was enough smoke nationally, I think, that Dan had to take this a lot more seriously, right? People were literally tweeting out, no one's going to interview there with Bruce. Like, it's just not going to happen. And everyone was talking about how undesirable the Redskins job is. And I think even with Bruce gone, it's still probably the least desirable. I think Ron Rivera is, and I'm actually pro Rivera, and we can get into that later, but it's a safe pick for Dan. he can sell a guy that's won. He can sell a guy that's going to build a culture. It's a safe bet. But these other organizations like the Cowboys and Panthers, Cleveland's looking for a coach every year, so maybe they fall into our category. But those guys can go get the enemies, right? They have the resources. Coaches are going to want to go there because of the talent that's there, and they're going to be given a blank check, and it's just like, it's a model franchise. How many times does something change in the Redskins organization and people say, "Oh, Dan wants to win," and then 6 months later,
it's square one.
It's back to square one. And my point is like, as bad as Bruce was, I think you have Dan, who's just going to say what he needs to say to get someone hired, then go do his own thing. And Bruce, people are like, you know what? I can deal with one or the other, but I'm not doing both. And the only thing that was going to change is getting rid of Bruce.
And to the point that everyone else has made, that Bruce is the type of guy who's going to poison the well for whoever the coach is, kind of like what he did with Scott McLuhan, like the track record.
Oh, did you read Kimes' report about this today?
Yes.
Just came out probably like an hour ago.
His thing, as usual, he killed it. Like just all the stuff.
It's so good. I had no idea that I knew our facilities sucked. That's kind of been well reported. I didn't realize that the players and the executives are on the same floor.
Literally, like right next to each other.
They just interact with each other. I've been there. I didn't realize they were together. I was like, oh, this is just where the executives are and players are walking by. I didn't know that like every organization is totally separate. In
Kime's story, he had that quote from Will Compton, who said, and I quote, "You love being there. You love the relationships you had there." He meant in terms of players. "But outside the friendships and relationships, you see that, man, it's a toxic place." And it's just so funny when you see that type of quote, again, coming from a player who was pretty well liked by the organization, one of those gritty, scrappy players, not like a high round draft pick or highly touted draft pick or whatever. Like he was an undrafted free agent.
I don't think he was drafted.
If I'm not mistaken.
Went to Nebraska, right?
Yeah, and you see him saying that, and you just juxtapose that with the culture is damn good, and it's just really funny. And then the culture quote by Snyder, as you mentioned in the statement, was just chef's kiss. And then let's just segue to Ron Rivera while we're there. I think one of the reasons, while it doesn't have the quote unquote sex appeal that a Urban Meyer would have, or maybe some other, not the Lincoln Riley or any of that. Anybody? I
don't think we could have gone that route. Anyway.
No, I think we could have offered him $20 million a year. I don't think.
No first-time head coach is going to come here. They'll be set up to fail.
But more than anything else, when Ron Rivera got fired, and all the people who came out in his defense, not defense, but like the people who came out as statements after he got fired, including guys like Luke Kuechly and all those guys in the Panthers, they just kept saying, like, forget about the fact that he was a good coach or whatever level of coach he was. He was a great human being, and he was somebody who was well respected, well liked, like held in very, very, very high regard among his players, among the community, among everything else. He was the type of guy who would bend over backwards for his players, but still command the respect of all the guys in the room. All of this is a way of saying he was a culture builder. And I think this was a major point for Dan to go out and get him, not because Rivera was the sexiest or the shiniest toy on the available, but it was because he kind of realized that, as the saying goes, the inmates were running the asylum for too long. And I think there was the statements that everyone was making about how Bill Callahan came in and kind of tightened up all those loose ends that Jay Gruden kind of left when he was there. And I think this kind of just takes that to the next level, minus the caveman philosophy of Bill Callahan. Riverboat Ron was always a moniker for Ron Rivera because of his ability to gamble and maybe somewhat play the analytics a little bit, but just, at least play the percentages and be more aggressive in certain cases, combined with the fact that, again, he is the proverbial leader of men. And I really think that's the big thing. And I also believe, and we'll talk about this in a second, that he kind of, instead of saying, forcing him to work with Bruce Allen, he found somebody who, one, will work with Dwayne Haskins, and two, would be okay to the idea of keeping Kevin O'Connell as the offensive coordinator.
Yeah, I actually really want to talk about that part, but there's a couple things about Rivera that stood out to me, because you're right. All those players, after he got fired, from McCaffrey to Olsen to Kuechly, all came out and just said how awesome this guy was, and so beloved that the Panthers even let him give a press conference as he was being fired. He was like, "Yeah, I can't think he gets enough," and he walked out the door, obviously.
And not to cut you off, but even when Tepper did his 10-minute interview about that, he started off the first 60 seconds of saying, look, Ron Rivera is a great guy. There was no vindictiveness spike, not like what we did with Bruce Allen. He spent the first 30 to 60 seconds basically saying what a great person Rivera was, and that just change was needed. But sorry, go ahead, I cut you off.
No, it fits in well where I was going with this. There's two people that came out today that stood up to me. One was Jared McCoy, who was basically like, I came to the Panthers to play for him, and they asked him like, what do you think about his being hired at the Redskins? And he said, I forget the exact quote, but something along the lines of, their career is about to change because of him. Like, he loves him. The other one was from Dan Orlovsky.
Orlovsky.
Is that
Yeah.
how you pronounce his name?
Yep.
And he came out and he said, go check out what the Panthers have done the last month and tell me Ron Rivera wasn't the one keeping that team together.
Yeah.
Right.
They look like shit after he got
They look
fired.
like shit. They were terrible.
Yes.
And this guy won 6-7 games with Kyle Allen, who was undrafted. And he's very defensive minded. I think one of his knocks, because there is the knock that he's had more losing seasons than winning seasons, has been offense. But like, those players go out and play as hard as they can for him every single week. And that is something that, we haven't seen since, Gibbs 2.0, maybe. I can't remember the last time the Redskins week to week played as hard as they could. I really can't.
Gibbs 2.0 is accurate, where they were consistently, whether or not they played well, they at least played hard. And to your point, I think that's what it was. I think a lot of Rivera, I'm not saying this because he's our guy now. I think Rivera is a great leader of men, but you can definitely look at his resume and say, like, and you alluded to it, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But I think Rivera was a little bit of was because of the GMs that he had around him. Marty Herney was a people pleaser. Marty Herney was the type of guy who would dole out big contracts just to keep player loyalty. That's another reason why the Panthers organization was held in
this dude went to a Super Bowl with Gettleman.
Exactly. So Dave Gettleman, right? Like, who never met a lineman he wouldn't draft, or who was very straight out of 1973 mentality of drafting and building a team. He took Dave Gettleman's and Marty Herney's guys to a Super Bowl. That team consistently had trouble with offensive line. I don't think the Panthers, outside of 2015, they had a really good offensive line. They had 2 All-Pros that year. But like, they've always had offensive line troubles. They've off and on had wide receiver troubles, especially since Steve Smith retired mostly. They never had that like really complete team. There was always like this one gaping hole. They had like a hodgepodge of running back between Jonathan Allen or Jonathan Stewart, and Christian McCaffrey. And to your point, he still took that team there. Now to winning records, I think it was 3 times. He had 3 double-digit win seasons in 8 full seasons as head coach. Those 3 times they won 12 games, 15 games, and 11 games. He never finished with less than 6 wins in any of his years there, including his first year, which was Cam Newton's rookie year. And he was 3-4 in his playoff games. And of course, the Super Bowl appearance in 2015, which I believe they went 15-1 that year. So, there's both sides of the equation on his resume, which I think you can say for most any good coach, they're going to have a few shitty seasons. I'm sure Mike Tomlin has that if I took a closer look to it. But yeah, more than anything else, he's just going to instill a sense of playing hard, being a tough-minded team, which I think was always something of a question under Gruden. Gruden's teams, for as fun and interesting and all of those things they've been, they just had the potential. They always had that play up to the good opponents, play down to the really shitty opponents.
Yeah, and I think it's just interesting to see how this all came together. We've talked a lot about culture and things. I think I'm going to shift a little to Kevin O'Connell. I think Dan put this together a couple weeks ago. That's why when we started talking about Rivera, I never thought Marvin Lewis was coming back. I think I'm guessing he was one of the people Dan spoke to.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Because obviously he was there in 2002, maybe to whenever Spurrier was there, because Lewis was a coordinator. But the idea that
it's just 2002, yes.
I bet you that Dan went to Rivera with the idea is like, look, I want you to come in. What do you want? Bruce gone. Okay, I'll take care of Bruce as long as you keep O'Connell as your coordinator. I bet you a conversation like that was had between them. One of the things that, obviously Rivera needs to be hired. They're at Morton's right now. Literally as we speak, they're at Morton's. And obviously he's got to figure out what kind of staff he wants to put together. And that I want it to be his decision and not anybody else's. But O'Connell sticking, I think, is a very important part to this. One, because once O'Connell was given a little freedom, our offense actually started looking like a, futuristic modern day NFL offense. 2, and I don't think this can be overlooked, the beginning of the year, all the reports were the same. Jay's offense is too complicated for Dwayne. The verbiage is too difficult. He's having a hard time learning how to say it, et cetera, et cetera. Do you want to start all of that over with a new coordinator?
Absolutely.
Or do you want to keep someone that's been there, they know each other? Haskins even came out today and said, I hope Kevin stays. Calls him by first name. They like each other. Everyone on that offense loves O'Connell. I think the McVay thing plays into this. We've talked about this about a bunch leading up to this. Dan doesn't want this guy walking out the door. I really honestly, obviously we're not there, but that's what I think the negotiation between the two were. I think Dan's been plotting this for a while. There's no way Rivera would have been here as fast if this hasn't been in the works for a couple weeks. But my guess is Rivera asked for Bruce to be gone. Dan's response was, fine, you have to keep O'Connell, or something along those lines. Because I don't think O'Connell's going anywhere.
And I think an interesting layer to all of that, 100% agree. And when I said absolutely to your point about wanting to do that all over again, I mean, absolutely, like, this is a very valid point in the sense that why would you want to have another system where Dwayne Haskins has to A, build a relationship with his offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach, and B, have to learn everything all over again.
That's Jason Campbell 2.0.
Exactly, right? Jason Campbell, called me the last living apologist for him, but like Josh Rosen's gone through the exact same thing in all of the situation. Like we tend to overlook how much this type of disruption affects the development of a quarterback, and how having someone like, Peyton Manning had Tom House, and I forget his quarterback's coach name for God knows how long. Tom Brady had, I don't remember who it was initially, but then he's had Josh McDaniels for God knows how long.
Forever.
But all of those things. And I think to your point about that, one thing that I found really interesting about this entire situation, Ron Rivera has never been opposed to having an offensive coordinator who differs in a philosophy or just kind of does his own thing. Like Rivera's that classic defensive head coach who's like, offense, you do your thing as long as it fits under the umbrella of what I want to do, but otherwise I'm not going to interfere with you. Like, don't forget that in his first few years, he had Mike Shula as his offensive coordinator. I think first quarterback's coach was Mike Shula, then he got elevated to offensive coordinator. After that kind of ran its course, he brought in Norv Turner, and Norv Turner was the offensive coordinator for the last couple of years, right? I mean, it's old Norv Turner, who was kind of a leper when he got hired 2 years ago, and everyone wondered what type of fit that was, and it actually turned out to be really good. And I think that works really well because when Snyder quote unquote put Kevin O'Connell on Rivera, it's not forcing it down his throat. It's one of those things where it's like, okay, this coach is kind of amenable to the setup, or it happens to be that this coach is amenable to this type of setup. And I think that's really interesting because, as we can talk about in a second, Rivera probably said like, I'll take O'Connell, I'm okay with this, but then I get my guy as defensive coordinator being Steve Wilkes, who is a long time,
they've been together,
is his long-time assistant as far back as when Rivera was actually in San Diego, or what was now San Diego.
They'll always be San Diego in my book.
Bingo.
No, I think you're right. I think O'Connell stays. I think Wilkes is interesting. Wilkes is kind of he's one of those guys that's like, he's the defensive coordinator, but really is the DB's coach. It'll be Rivera's defense, but I think Wilkes has been a DB coach for well over 10 years, and we have some pretty good young corners who could use that tutelage. You have Dunbar, you have Moreland, you have the interesting one, obviously, is Norman, because he played for them. His best season came with them. I think he's gone. I don't even think that's going to be a thing. But Fabian Moreau, once he went to the outside, obviously started playing well. I think you're right. If we go back to Hess being fired, I think Dan is at Morton's right now saying, they're finalizing this, right? They're putting ink to paper, stuff like that. Wilkes, the defensive coordinator, Connov's offensive coordinator. Rivera gets to not only pick the rest of the staff, he gets to pick the strength training staff. He's going to get to pick the the trainers, etc. This is an important day. This is like the ultimate reset. This isn't like the Vinny reset when they just brought Bruce in and nothing really changed.
It's the same thing. Yep.
Yeah. This was like Bruce or Dan just fired like everyone. Now Santos is still there. Schaefer's still there.
Kyle Smith is still there.
And we got to figure out what the front office is going to look like. Yeah, no one's been talking about Doug.
No, don't hear his name in anything, which kind of just serves a purpose that he's a figurehead and he's kind of an ombudsman at best.
Yeah, it has to be because he hasn't been mentioned. I haven't seen his name mentioned one time today. And I forget where I was going with this, but with Wilkes and the staff, I was going with the staff.
Yes, heads rolling.
Heads roll, but I think Rivera is going to come in. I think part of the culture that we go back to is like Dan wants to give this guy control because he's known as the culture guy. And I'm almost wondering if Redskins fans made such a big deal of that comment that Bruce made about culture that Dan just latched onto it and was like, holy shit, our culture's that bad. And now I'm going to fix that one thing. Um, and so I think he's going to give Rivera complete control over to go hire whoever you want. I really
moves
do.
like this tend to be very reactionary. I would not be the slightest bit surprised if that's exactly what happened, to your point.
Oh, who knows? I know that I think it was Norman today when he was talking about bringing in Wilkes, because Wilkes basically made his career.
Yes, I think it's an underlooked plot line that Steve Wilkes was the guy under whom Josh Norman became an All-Pro. I think he was an All-Pro in 2015, the year before he left Carolina.
He was. He was an All-Pro. Then he got tagged, and the tag was rescinded. And as soon as rescinded, McLuhan flew him in, and we signed him to whatever the hell his contract is. But when he was talking about Wilkes and Rivera as early as today, he was like, he also made some pretty terrific backhanded comments at the Redskins organization. But he was the one talking about, if this comes in, going back to that culture piece, it's going to be night and day if those two are in here. And I bet you he wants to stay because of it, because he knows he'd be in a system where his talents are actually utilized properly. Now, he's still 32. He made his money. Time to move on. But, he was all about Wilkes and the defensive coordinator. He was all about Rivera. The glowing reviews of all these guys are crazy, and I think Dan's right now saying whatever you want to do to change his culture, do it. I think it's happening as we speak.
I would not be the slightest bit surprised. This is purely speculative, but Norman comes back on a 1 or 2 year or 1+1 type of deal, prove it type of deal, where he banks on himself, because I think on the free agent market, I believe he's worthless, and if he's really going to find a situation where he can try to cash in on one last contract, even if it's a 2 or 3 year type of deal, it would be here. And especially with a new regime, front office now that seemingly would believe in him, and a coaching staff that he has comfort with and who has comfort with him, I wouldn't be so. And as someone who has been very open,
think he would take that big a pay cut?
I think so, because I think he's a leper right now in terms of any other team. Like, I don't think any other team is going to be willing to deal out more than a few million here or there at best. And that's probably very, very generous. And if all things considered, if he's getting a 1 year, $6 million type of deal elsewhere, why wouldn't he just take it in Washington? Like, that's again,
good point.
The best situation.
Especially considering he knows the coaches, he knows the scheme. There's really nothing he even really needs to think about. I don't think he's back, though. I think he's gone. I think the organization is starting fresh completely. But you mentioned Smith and Schaefer. We talked recently, as far back as a couple weeks ago, about them being kind of the ideal fit for GM, president of football operations. It sounds like, according to Julia Donaldson, that Schaefer is not going to get that GM job. Little known fact, by the way, that Rivera and AJ Smith, Kyle's dad, are friends.
I did not know that.
Yes, so they work together in San Diego, and apparently have a very good relationship. So Kyle Smith is someone like I think we have to keep an eye on here. He's obviously not going anywhere. He's got a little bit of that young star. Dan's not going to let him out the door. Schaefer, terrific with contracts. Make the guy president tomorrow and just let him run all of that because he's so good at it. But, I think that's the ideal scenario. But one of the things I think about now is the idea of a lot of people freak out about hiring a coach before a GM and how it should be the other way around. I don't think that matters at all, as long as they're hired at the same time and they work together, right? You don't want to have a GM that's on the hot seat hiring a coach and vice versa, right? Rivera comes in, he's basically going to get to pick who he wants to be the GM because he's going to have more power naturally. But I think Kyle Smith now is a 4-month, what April's month 4, right?
4 or 5, yes, depending on how you count it. Yes.
He has a 4-month. I think he has a 4-month audition for this job. It's well known that you're not going to fire the scouting staff right now because they've done too much work all year to throw out the window. You need them for the draft. So I think Kyle Smith is on the clock to be our next GM. And other names that have been thrown out are who's the dude that used to work for us? Morocco Brown, was it? Riddick's one of them. Brown's is it Morocco Brown?
Oh, Morocco Brown. Yes, Morocco Brown. Sorry.
Riddick's the big one, right? Everyone's been talking about Riddick for months.
We'll get to that.
Brown, the Texans guy,
Rick Smith.
Rick Smith. I think those are the only ones that have really been tossed out. And the guy that used to work, or who's the GM for the Panthers right now?
Marty Herney, who rumor
has it he's there.
He's in the building today.
Yeah. So
and that's a big. That's I tweeted on the account. It's like no me gusta, not one bit. No, thank you.
No, I agree. But I think we both agree. I believe that. I think Smith would be the ideal GM just because he's in house. He knows what to do.
Kyle Smith.
He's been with this order. Kyle Smith, yes. But I think he's on a 4-month audition starting literally whenever that paint dries on that signature. I think it's on him to win over that GM job. But it's gonna, I don't know what your thoughts on that are, but that's what I think.
So if it was up to me, not that it is in any way, shape, or form, if it's up to me, Kyle Smith and Eric Schaefer are the dynamic duo of what we do. I think to take one small left turn, and you were talking about this and elaborating on a little more. I've made a point several times in other pods. Like I listen to Mike Lombardi, former NFL GM's podcast, on his GM Shuffle.
He loves Dan.
He loves Dan and Bruce. So he loves him some Dan and Bruce. But one thing he said, as of late, he's like, regardless of whether you like it or not, whether it's right or not, and this is coming from the perspective of former GM, that the organizational structure where the head coach has the dotted line to the GM, who has the dotted line to the owner, no longer exists. We are in a paradigm now where the GM is a dotted line to the head, a direct report to the owner, and the head coach has an independent direct report to the owner as well. Like they both, there's no linear one. They both roll up to the owner, and that's kind of how it is. And I think in certain front offices, you see this a little bit in Seattle with Pete Carroll and John Schneider. You see this a lot, and saw this a lot in San Francisco with Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch. You see this a little bit in Kansas City with Andy Reid, and I can't remember. I think it's Chris Veach, I can't remember his Veach. Brian Veach, I want to say is the GM's name.
I don't know. No,
but there's certain ones where it's the head coach who's the de facto decision maker, but the GM is almost, I don't want to say like in a serving capacity, but basically a facilitating capacity. The GM is the one who works out the nuts and bolts in the business side of the organization, provides the scouting reports, and runs the personnel side, but it's the head coach who is the ultimate, to borrow a George W. Bush term, deciderer, right? Like that's how it kind of works out in that capacity.
Well, it's not even a little bit in San Francisco. It's not even a little bit in Buffalo. The head coaches control it. They were hired first. It's their gig. They helped go get the GMs hired.
Exactly, but
they work together.
Do the same way. The Eagles do it this way to some extent. That's the kind of current paradigm we're in at the moment, and I think this is what's going to happen, regardless of whether it's Schaefer as the money guy and Smith as the personnel guy, whether it is Louis Riddick as the personnel guy, whether it's Marty Herney as a personnel guy. It's not going to be them buying the groceries and expecting the coach to cook it. It's going to be the other way around. Using that metaphor, the head coach is the chef, and the other guy's just sourcing the groceries, basically.
Yeah, I think that goes back to part of the culture thing. I think Bruce wants Rivera to have control of that because that's what he's billed as. So he's going to hire him first, Dan, and let him do his own thing. And then I think I wouldn't be surprised if Kyle Smith becomes the GM and Schaefer becomes the kind of money guy. I think Riddick is continues to be a very intriguing name. I did poke fun a little bit at, I don't even know how to pronounce his last name, Chad Warinko. Is that his last name?
Oh, yeah, the Redskins Capital Connection guy.
Yeah. Poke fun at him because he's just retweets everything about Riddick that he's been saying for years. But the thing that is most interesting to me is I go back to this guy, Charles Robinson, today. Came out and said for the GM search that obviously we know Dan basically handpicked Haskins in the draft last year. Well, apparently not only that, but apparently he's like completely sold on Haskins, and he's going to do everything he can to give that guy support. And the biggest supporter in the media is Riddick. Riddick is like super pro Haskins. He ripped Jay for bringing him into that Giants game. Basically, it was like you set him up for failure, screwed the kid. And Riddick's also said on Twitter and on TV that the Redskins haven't had a player like Haskins ever.
Yep.
I would not be surprised if, and the small twist here is Rivera and Riddick have never worked together.
Correct.
But to trump that, Riddick has worked with Dan, which I think is more important.
Yes, it is.
So as long as they can coexist, I would not be surprised if he becomes our GM just because of his connection to A, Dan, and B, his love affair of Haskins. So
And coming in with an MO of we have to build around Haskins, and Haskins is not the problem. It's not like how McLuhan and Gruden are where we're going to come in and say, look, I know you hired us to fix Robert. We can't fix Robert. Go with Kyle or Kirk rather, right? Like it's not going to be like that situation. They're brought in to say, fix. Not that Dwayne Haskins necessarily needs fixing, but make him better, make me look right. And I think there was a quote by John Keim who he said it very eloquently. He said, the next GM kind of has to come in and he didn't say this, but he indirectly said it, massage Dan's ego to a certain extent, that when moves work out, make it seem like it came from Dan.
Give Dan credit.
Give Dan the credit for a move working out. And I think, that's going to be the interesting dynamic of what GM is willing to do that. But as long as they're in agreement that, they're making moves in the interest of improving Haskins and Haskins, which indirectly is going to massage Dan's ego, because Dan was the one, as we said, came in and said, screw you, scouting staff, we're taking Dwayne Haskins. I don't care what you think about your evaluation. And I think that's really what it's going to come down to. I did not realize the AJ Smith connection, but that makes a ton of sense. I clearly missed on that one. And I wonder if that's going to supersede the potential relationship between Riddick and Ron Rivera working together. I don't know. The NFL is, excuse me, it's all about cronyism at the end of the day, or old connections.
It's a good old boys club.
It's a good old boys club in its purest form. So that's going to be another interesting dynamic to watch. I especially to the other point you made about how Eric Schaefer and Kyle Smith are wonder kids, and whether Dan's going to want to let them get out of the building, considering all the work that they've done so far. I think it's just going to be interesting. I will repeat my stance that Marty Hurney is not the guy that we want here. Like I said, he is just throw money at guys and make this desirable place to play, which indirectly means we dole out big money for players that we shouldn't. And that's the old.
That sounds familiar.
Redskins. I was going to say that sounds very, very familiar. This is what we used to do, and that would be the same old thing, just packaged up in a new form.
Yeah, it's funny. You mentioned that Kime piece where he basically said you got to make it seem like it's Dan's idea for it to go over well. That's been said throughout the years. Snyder's like this 11-year-old fan who wants to meddle, and every time I see a report, it's like, actually, he's not that close to football operations anymore. He doesn't meddle as much as he used to. I basically laugh because the amount of times he comes and he says, "No, get this done." It happens. And you just have to deal with it. And I think it's interesting. I think GMs – that's why I think Riddick is so interesting, because he knows that. And he's had to deal with it as someone that was in our scouting department. So he could definitely handle it. And another reason why I think Kyle Smith is interesting, he's been in the building. He's probably been massaging Dan's ego for a long time, so he probably knows how to handle it as well. And speaking of the good old boys club, he could probably tell Rivera, hey, this is how you need to do it in order to be successful. So
I don't want to ever sound like a Dan Snyder apologist in any way, shape, or form, because I'm not, and I would believe the only
Dan's the worst.
Day greater than what today has been would be Dan Snyder selling the team. Let me make that emphatically clear. Not that that's ever going to happen in our lifetimes, but I think one thing we should be cognizant of while we bash Snyder and all of those things as a meddling, somebody who's always got his hands on the product. I think that happens in every NFL team and every professional sports team, if you want to be completely honest. I mean, the worst example of this, or the most prime example of this, look at James Dolan and the Knicks, right? Every single thing that happens in the New York Knicks organization is because James Dolan fucking one thing up after another. It's all Dolan. Dolan's running the organization. They can hire whatever.
He might be the only owner worse than.
Yeah, he's the only one I'll say emphatically is worse than Dan Snyder in terms of owners in professional sports, right? It was him and Donald Sterling. Sterling is obviously no longer the owner, right? But James Dolan. But I think even if you go to the NFL, right? Like I've said this 1,000 times among friends, and I've said it among, on probably the podcast and stuff like that. We all hold Bob Kraft as like, oh, he just signs the checks and Bill Belichick runs the organization. I will die on the hill to this day that Bob Kraft was the one who made the decision to trade Jimmy Garoppolo because Tom Brady came and whined and said, I don't want this guy looking over my shoulder. Bob Kraft was the one who decided to trade Jimmy Garoppolo, right? He intervened on this over Bill Belichick. There's no way in hell you can convince Bill Belichick wanted to trade or was the orchestrator of trading away Jimmy Garoppolo, because that was a parachute after Brady looks like Brady does right now. Again,
Not
Bob
good.
Kraft was the one who made the decision on dumping Antonio Brown because of all the off the field stuff, rightfully or wrongfully. Even after Tom Brady publicly lobbied that I want to keep Antonio Brown on the team, Bob Kraft is like, look, we can't keep this guy on. Steve Bisciotti over in Baltimore, the model organization, he was largely the one responsible for the draft pick of Lamar Jackson, right? Like, it's been well documented that the Ravens traded back twice in the 2018 draft and took Lamar Jackson with their second first round pick. And they traded only after Steve Bisciotti was like, yo, we can make this work. Can we make this work? Go coaches, go make this work. And then they traded up to take Lamar Jackson. What I'm trying to say with all of this is that owners meddle a lot more than we think. And just Snyder gets a lot of publicity for it because all the stuff he did in the
always fails.
Well, that too.
Yes. It always fails. Speaking of meddling, we've talked a lot about Bruce. We've alluded to Larry Hassett a few times. I tweeted from the Hail to District. I'm actually going to pull it up so I can read it from the Hail to District Twitter today about. I tweeted at Trent Williams. I said, "Come home at Trent Williams. You're the most beloved Skins player of all time now. You did this. Now come back home and let's finish what we started." One of my buddies texted me today and was like, "Do you think Dan just, listened to Trent, said, we're going to fire Bruce and we're going to fire Larry all on the same day? And at dinner right now, they're talking about filling up Redskins 1, flying down to Texas or Oklahoma or wherever he is and say, come on home." I think Dan's going to meddle in a good way and I think Trent's coming back. I'm like convinced that he is now going to come back and play for us.
If I had to put my money on it, I would say Trent comes back. I'm of the same sentiment.
Dan's going to be like, hey, those checks I held from you? Here you go. No problem. Don't tell anybody. Like,
not only that,
happen.
But Trent, whether he did this intentionally or whether he did this in reaction, Trent was very effusive in his praise for Dan Snyder, by and large, and he was the one, as we've talked about previously, who made Bruce Allen to be the plantation owner. The John Kine piece today again said, and I quote, Williams said he believes Allen did not trade him or did not allow a trade out of purely vindictiveness, right? So what does that tell you? Like, Williams has come in and said, I expected to be traded or I expected to play, and neither happened. And someone with the agenda was the one who orchestrated that, and it wasn't Snyder. So if you remove that, I have to believe that Snyder making this decision to push Allen out the door, one of the factors of this absolutely was what Bruce Allen did to Trent Williams and the public PR disaster that turned out to be. And now that we're on the other side of this, he can make a better PR move by rectifying all of this and bringing back Trent Williams and simultaneously fixing the left tackle position.
Not only can he fix it, I mean, I think Trent wants to come back. To your point about how he phrased, his complaints to the Redskins organization, and we talked about this, at length whenever we talked about Trent. Like, he just threw haymaker after Bruce. He complimented Dan, to your point, and he kept referring to things like, I actually missed the locker room. I missed the guys in there. Like, I miss the fans. He prepped himself as, and when people ask, well, if Bruce was fired, what would you do? And it's always the same response. Well, we'll see what happens.
We'll see.
Yeah. And so now that the two people he hated the most, Bruce and Hess, are gone, I don't see a world where he doesn't come back. And the part of me today, like, the reason I'm like so adamant and think this is going to happen is Haskins tweeted out, at Trent.
Yep.
Let me holler at you real quick.
Yeah, exactly.
And Trent liked it.
Yes.
And liked multiple other tweets about Redskins fans being like, come home. I think so. One of the things that I think gets lost a little now, it wasn't lost before, but now that he's had the tumor and all this stuff with Bruce that he's gone through, is Trent has always been big on his legacy and what that means to him. He's always said the legacy means more to me than playing. Could you imagine how beloved this guy would be? If not only does he come back, I basically view him as I'm not saying he's the sole reason Bruce is gone, but I think he was the linchpin, because he's the one who publicly brought all this out to the national media and was like, yo, this is bad. And people started talking about it more than just #fire Bruce Allen. It was a national story. So you have a guy who's drafted here, he plays his whole career here. He's the one that gets Bruce fired, comes back, and let's say he sets the tone, and all of a sudden we're good again. that's a narrative that he's in the ring of fame immediately, and his legacy is like cemented. And I don't think that can be lost. He'd be one of the most beloved Redskins of all time. He really
Can you
would.
imagine the idea that Trent Williams comes back and has as a subtitle to his legacy or his title as a member
What
of
if
the
we win?
Redskins? He was the guy that helped us fire Bruce Allen, and then to your point, maybe bring us some type of playoff success. If I dare say further, like think about what that does for him. I mean, he's already one of the most beloved offensive linemen since the Hogs of the '80s and the early '90s, and if he does all of that, I mean, he's yeah. To your
I
point
mean,
about
his
his
blood.
legacy, how much more can you do on top of being the one
Yeah.
All-Pro contender we have?
Second, don't sleep on my boy Tress.
Yeah, I was gonna say outside the punter, and I just kind of bit my tongue there. But yes,
Trent, we got him long term now. I just signed long term today.
4 years
Great
for the
time.
punter, man.
Great time on the announcing of that extension being official the day Bruce gets fired. But yeah, no, I think you're right. I think if he comes back and then we win, his legacy just doubles in importance to his whole Redskins career, and that's all he ever talks about. I want to build a legacy here. This is my team. Think about the amount of injuries that guy played through, just in general, and he's not the only one. I don't know if you saw the Dunbar tweet about Larry Hess. It is
I missed
terrific.
that one.
It's terrific.
Oh, I missed it. I'm gonna have to go back and look for it.
I will. Yeah, I'll have to look it up for you because he calls out Larry, what's his name, Hess, as hard as you possibly can. He was like, "Oh, Larry's out too." ... Who's surprised or something like that.
Nice.
It was so direct at him. You couldn't miss, and it went wild on Twitter earlier today.
And for someone who's gone through the injury history that Dunny has, it's not surprising, right? I mean, look at the shit that guy's gone through in his few years here.
Yeah, he also has some weird injuries. He had that nerve injury that was so bizarre.
And given everything that Geis, that Colt, that Trent, and everybody else has been through, what are the odds that, or I should say, how low are the odds, or how high, I should say, or that his injuries were misdiagnosed at some level?
Oh, they 100% were.
Right.
I mean, all those players. That guy, Robert Hinton, we've alluded to.
Yep.
He's been talking about this for like 9 years, ever since the Redskins cut him. He was just like, this is the worst organization I've ever seen.
Who was the guy that basically he had a horrible knee injury and they're like, it's a sprain, and they made him do bear crawls in practice because he was his knee was so messed up, and they had said that he was just being a pansy about it, and they were making basically he's ripping the stitches are ripping off his knee as he's doing these drills, and the coaches were basically like, you need to toughen up, and it's like this guy's stitches Hainsworth was just laying around the field and eating. But I can't remember who was the player. Somebody over the last couple of weeks, but it's just unreal. Maybe I'm thinking of another team.
I don't know who that is, but it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Doesn't surprise me. Doesn't surprise me at all. But if you can't tell, I'm like, I need some Mucinex badly.
I'm one step ahead of you in terms of recovery.
Yeah, no, I waking up today, regardless of what else happens, Bruce being fired, I short of running in the streets because the Nats won the World Series, I was about as pumped as you get. It was like a mini Super Bowl victory for me personally. That guy, I was with my family this weekend in Boston, and my two nieces and nephew are basically Patriots fans. They've grown up in Boston. You see that much winning. How are you not a Patriots fan? And my brother jokingly was like, yeah, even for me, as he's older than I am, but he's a big Skins fan. He's like, even for me, being here and seeing them win constantly, it's hard not to root for them. And he asked me how, keep in mind, this is before Bruce got fired. What's it like being in Seattle? Because obviously the 12th man and you got Seahawks spot basically everywhere. And I kind of joked and looked at my brother and said, I think this pain may die with me. I'm not sure I can pass this on. And, it hurt my dad to even hear that because he's the one that made us all Redskins fans. And I at the moment sincerely meant it. But this morning when I woke up and found out Bruce Allen was fired, I was like, all right, give me my burgundy and gold shades. Give me my jersey.
It's back in.
Oh man, you can't quit them. You can't quit.
You can't. Somebody said, pardon my vernacular in this, but someone said this so eloquently years back, and I love this phrase, is he's like, being a Redskins fan is like being married to a bitch you can't stand. And that's just what it is, right? Like
It's an abusive relationship.
Or I see the other way around. It's the old Jim Carrey in Dumb and Dumber. So you're saying there's a chance every single time. Or so you're telling me there's a chance. Like it's every single time. And then after that, you go back to me and you say, what was all that 1 in a million talk? Right. And like that's just what life is, right? And it's like on top of all of that, and we'll save this entire thing for another day, but it's like we even locked up the 2nd overall pick, and now we just have to make sure we don't fuck it up, especially with the defensive-minded head coach, to just bring Chase Young here. And not even
RG line with Rivera could be sick.
Bring Chase Young back home. He's from Hyattsville, right? So it's like just do that. It's marketing wrapped up for you, right? He's an Ohio State guy. Somebody asked Dwayne Haskins about what's the number 2 overall pick, and he said 2 yards Chase Young. Like it's all gift wrap for you. Everything's coming up Millhouse, to borrow another Simpsons quote, right? Like it's
plus Wilkes. Going back to Wilkes, he runs a 4.3.
4.3, right? And I think
if you look at it all, what's up?
As I was saying, Finley has been alluding to it for quite some time, saying that the next coach is probably going to
end Snyder wants
3, which is probably what, well, frankly speaking, works better with his personnel anyway. I mean, Ryan Anderson is a textbook Sam linebacker.
Dude, they all are. Kerrigan has been playing out of position for
his entire
career. We dropped Sweat into coverage in 3 games, 33 different times. Why? The dude's a 6'6" edge rusher. Just put his hand in the dirt and let him go.
Deron Payne and Jonathan Allen as 4.3 defensive tackles. You couldn't ask for anything better. It makes so much sense that it's
and
like,
they're not even the best DTs on the team.
Exactly. We haven't talked about King Ioannidis yet.
Don't sleep on King Knights.
Right? So
dude, that D-line, oh man, we could be so good.
Right?
No, don't say that. We're still years away.
We're still years
away. This is what happens.
I think we'll end on that note. We'll probably have much more to discuss in a subsequent podcast coming up very shortly as things as the dust settles, and maybe if the GM position solidifies sooner rather than later, which it may not given some of the stuff we said earlier. But thank you for everyone who's made it this far. As always, if you haven't done so already, please make sure you follow us on SoundCloud and subscribe to us on iTunes or wherever else you get your podcast. And until then, we will talk to you later. And I can say this without a sense of irony or a sense of self-deprecation. Hail to the Redskins.
Hail to the Redskins. We're back.
So you're saying there's a chance.
We'll win 3 games next year.